Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to GarbAugust's, the BookTube event your mother warned you about. This is a month-long celebration of trash that was created by Ollie at Criminale. I'm one of the hosts, and we are reading garbage throughout the month of August. Now, unlike some of the GarbAugust co-hosts that I have the honor to share this event with, I am not only reading garbage for the month of August, nor am I primarily reading garbage intentionally. Let me explain. For those of you who might be new to the channel, I am a professional book reviewer, and I am reading books for review or review consideration a large part of every day. New books, brand new books, stuff that isn't out yet. And GarbAugust has really underscored for me what I knew before and have sometimes been known to complain about, which is that 90% of those books are garbage. Invoking Theodore Sturgeon's great rule of 90% of science fiction is crud, but then again, 90% of everything is crud. So I read a lot of garbage in any given month that doesn't think that it's garbage, would be shocked if you called it garbage. It would certainly be news to the major book prizes that it's garbage because they can't lavish praise on these things fast enough. But in addition to that, I have also been reading things that I think anyone would call trash. And that's been a lot of fun, especially if the author is in on it. If the author is in on the joke, there is no better feeling than when the author is in on the joke, when they know what they're doing, and they just want to please you by doing it. That is fantastic. But as I mentioned yesterday, I alluded to the fact yesterday because I broke a little boy's heart yesterday when I talked about The Phantom by Lee Falk. And in the course of that conversation, I mentioned that some discussions of some trash are tough because we all love some trash. Most of us do. Most of us, there's some trash that's close to our heart. And if you read a certain kind of trash for a long time, let's say 28 years, reading it and rereading it and rereading it and going back to it whenever the mood strikes you, going back to it as a solace in times of rough patches in life, you're going to build an emotional connection to that work, to those kinds of books, to that author. That is real, and it is totally justifiable, and it's going to tempt you to think, well, if this meant that much to me, it must be good. It mustn't be trash. The key realization to come across here, the thing to underline in your mind, is that anything can come to mean something to you, right? It doesn't have to be. The fact that it comes to mean something to you isn't necessarily a reflection or revelation of its inner quality, right? To use an example of my own that some of you have been watching this channel long enough to see, once upon a time, for 15 years, I had a basset hound named Lucy. And it didn't take long. I found her as a little puppy, and I had her for her whole life. And it didn't take long for me to realize that not only was she different from any dog I'd ever had, I chalked that up to just I'd never had a basset hound before. It's that she was different from any other basset hound. She was nuts. She was very angry most of the time. She heard voices. She was constantly seeking sexual partners among plastic recycling bins or fire hydrants or newspaper vending machines. She never remembered even basic things from day to day. She was the only dog I've ever had who had to be house trained every day. Didn't understand the first thing about anything. Sometimes she could be affectionate. But sometimes right in the middle of being affectionate, she would just have one of her Mary Todd Lincoln spells and start hearing voices or growling or trying to kill the person who was petting her. Of course, it was impossible. She was seal blubber from head to toe. Even her teeth were soft. So she couldn't do any damage. She would often try. And Lucy meant the world to me. She was one of those dogs. Those of you who those of you who have dogs or cats, you'll know, you love them all, but there's a special set aside that get to you more. They mean more. And Lucy was one of those. And she was, for me, the very first one of those who didn't give two craps in a pan that she was one of those. Didn't give two craps in a pan about me, except when she was feeling affectionate. And didn't matter. So in the years since, I have looked back at Lucy, and that is helping me with GarbAugust because I am underscoring my realization. Lucy was not in any way a good dog, except that she was unbelievably cute. She was absolutely adorable. Strangers on the street would stop to take her picture or to come over and meet her, and I would just hope that she was going to behave herself. Usually she did. She liked strangers. It's only when you got to know her, it's only when she came to know you, that she would start to make Mary Todd Lincoln demands on you. That was my first experience with a dog that was so cute on sight that strangers would stop what they were doing or lean out the passenger window of their car to take a picture. That was the first time that had ever happened to me. I'd mostly had crowds of beagles who were adorable to me, but to everybody else, they looked like normal dogs. It's amazing to me that I am now on my second dog like that. Frida also has that effect on strangers, if anything more than Lucy did, where they just have to meet her. They have to cross the street and see this little strutting dog. They have to take her picture or have her picture taken with them. But aside from the cuteness, I have had time enough to reflect, and certainly people told me while she was alive, that Lucy was a bad dog in every other way. She was disobedient. She was dim-witted. She was stupid. She was mentally deranged. She was incontinent. She was messy. She was ill-tempered. Everything. She was everything like that, and yet I loved her. That's the dichotomy that I'm talking about today for GarbAugust, because I finished a garbage book last night, just a thing I found on Kindle, and not worth a mention, really, because it was garbage in every sense of the word. It was garbage in all of its execution, but it was also garbage in that it wasn't even fun as garbage. Some of my co-hosts on GarbAugust have encountered books like that. They are out there. It's not like I think, or that we are saying with GarbAugust, that every bad book can be hugely enjoyed as a guilty pleasure. No, some books are bad in a way that's not enjoyable. Some books are bad in a bad way. And I encountered one of those yesterday and thought, I need a palate cleanser. I had read The Phantom, The Ghost Who Walks, and then I read a garbage book that was just a free Kindle thing that was not worth anything. I didn't pay anything for it, but it was not worth anything. It was not even good at being bad. So I thought, go back to your printed paperbacks. I was already going to do that anyway for GarbAugust. I was going to hunt for my shelves and find some more trash. But I've gone one step further. Last night I reread a book that I had no business rereading. I have reread this book a million times. But I went straight to the heart of the matter because I was worried that people seeing me pick on The Phantom might feel, well, you say that some garbage is so close to your heart that you can't analyze it critically, and you're happy to take a hatchet to that kind of garbage when it's somebody else's, but can you do it to yourself? Can you go to a garbage book that you love and look at it for GarbAugust? So I did, and I have to say, I enjoyed the experience. It was a little bit uncomfortable, but I enjoyed the experience enough to do it again. GarbAugust has almost 2 weeks left. I think I will do it again. The book is this. It's The Son of Tarzan by Edgar Rice Burroughs. In these old Ballantine covers, these painted Ballantine covers, these are not generally my favorite Tarzan covers. It's the Ballantine run right after this that you'll probably be familiar with. I wish I had one here. Didn't think to bring it. Those black mass market paperbacks with gorgeous cover artwork. I'm not saying that this isn't gorgeous. Do you know who did this? Look at that. I didn't look at that either. No. The cover artist is not credited, but one of you will probably be able to tell me. Or I have that big book on Tarzan, that oversized picture book that has an amazing treasure trove of information about Tarzan on the page, on the stage, on the screen. I can find the artist here. The artist here makes a weirdly unconventional choice to make Korak, the son of Tarzan, a blonde. But otherwise, I think it's a beautiful cover. I really do. I really like it. And it's pretty much the only cover from this run on the Ballantine Tarzan paperbacks that I like. There are currently no Tarzan paperbacks, mass market paperback, in the bookstore. As far as I know, there are none. Certainly there's no new run with newly commissioned cover artwork. A terrible, terrible shame. I'm not sure that you could walk into a retail bookstore today and buy a copy of Son of Tarzan. But I don't have the newer mass market. I have one of those, but I had this because this is the copy that I go to. This has been beaten all to hell and gone. I've read this a million times. This, as you can see, is the 4th book in the Tarzan series, and it came out over a century ago. And it's the story of, it opens as the story of Jane Howard, of Tarzan's Jane, who, after the events of the previous 3 novels, has decided she doesn't want to go back to the jungle or anything like it. So she goes to the city, and she brings her little boy Jack there, wants to raise him as just an ordinary person. None of this business with marauding Arabs and savage African tribes and wild animals and whatnot. Nothing like that. That doesn't work. That plan doesn't work. And it doesn't work because a character recurs in this novel, a character called Palovich, who is a kind of a villain, recurs in this novel, and he shows up in the city with an ape, a Mangani, called Akut. Akut is one of this weird kind of a so-called great ape that Edgar Rice Burroughs more or less invented for Tarzan. I don't know how much anthropology Edgar Rice Burroughs knew when he started these books, and I don't know how much he ever learned in the course of writing these books, but he had to know. If not by the time he wrote Son of Tarzan, then certainly 10 books later, he had to know that the qualities he was describing to the Mangani, the great apes that are the ones who actually take in Tarzan as a baby, and in whose tribe Akut is a member, he had to know by then that the traits they had are not shared by any great apes on Earth other than humans. There are no hairy anthropoids in Africa who have unarticulated vocabulary, a language, an articulated culture, the concept of being able to simply speak with a human being. If you can just vocalize correctly, it's far more complicated than that, and far less advanced. The other great apes on Earth have pretty good brain sizes, pretty good cognition abilities, in proportion to their body weight. But the other great ape species that could do what the Mangani do, humans eliminated. Humans killed them off. So those don't exist anymore. There once upon a time were 6 or 7 that you could have found in Europe alone, who were not human, but they weren't great apes either. They were other species of human. They were other species of Homo sapiens. Clearly, that's what Edgar Rice Burroughs is creating here. Another species, a sort of slightly subhuman species of human. And Akut is one of those. And he suddenly finds himself in a cage on display as a curiosity in the city. And when Tarzan, who is in John Clayton, when Lord Greystoke is in the city and learns of this, he hears that there's an ape on display. He goes to see what it's like, just like any other curious city dweller, go and see the animal on display, and is shocked to realize that it's his friend. They start talking. He shifts out of English, and they start talking, and he has his son with him. And suddenly the son realizes that wonderful moment, that typical fictional moment, realizes there's much more to his father than he ever knew. And hears the story of all of that and is fascinated by Akut. And predictably goes back to see him against his parents' wishes and frees him, and they end up by a circuitous route back in the jungles of Africa. Where Korak has never been. His name is Jack, but the Mangani can't really pronounce that correctly. It comes out as kind of Korak, and coincidentally enough, Korak in their own language means killer. So that becomes his name in the jungle. And at first, he has no idea. He's a normal human. He wasn't raised from infancy in the jungle like Tarzan was. But Akut wants to teach him and wants to make him feel welcome. It's actually could be kind of touching. You get the strong sensation that young Jack has never felt like he belonged anywhere. Might explain the sort of parental relationship that he forms with Palovich in the course of part of this book, ill-advised though it is. That element, that dramatic possibility, is never explored in this book, nor does Edgar Rice Burroughs seem aware that it exists, except for a couple of isolated moments, and that's important for our discussion of assessing trash that is close to your heart. I want to point that out. That whole dimension of possibility about what young Jack feels in the world is largely ignored. There's one part where we get something of it explicitly, because he's starting to realize that he seems beloved by no one. The lesser beasts flee from me in terror, he murmured, half to himself. The greater beasts are ready to tear me to pieces at sight. Black men would kill me with their spears and arrows, and now white men of my own kind have fired upon me and driven me away. Are all the creatures of the world my enemies? Has the son of Tarzan no friend other than Akut? And Akut says, there are the great apes. They will be the only friends of Akut's friend. Only the great apes will welcome the son of Tarzan. You have seen that men want nothing of you. Let us now continue our search for the great apes, our people. At which point, Edgar Rice Burroughs, it could have been a touching scene. But then Edgar Rice Burroughs stops right in the middle of that scene and says, the language of the great apes is a combination of monosyllabic gutturals amplified by gestures and signs. It may not be literally translated to human speech, but as near as may be, that is what Akut said to the boy. Thanks, Edgar. Scene ruined. But they have adventures in the jungle, and there is all sorts of plot stuff that Edgar Rice Burroughs throws in. Right? Because the obvious plot here, the simple one-dimensional plot would be Jack is lost in the jungle. He is slowly learning to embrace the Tarzan side of his inheritance. He is adopted and accepted by the Mangani, while Tarzan is frantically looking for him at the behest of his worried mother. And that simple plot would have it that at the end of the book, he finds him, only his son is a man now. They now know each other. And that is the satisfying culmination of that plot. And in a way, we get that. But it's not done the way a different kind of novelist would do it. And again, we'll be getting to that. Instead, we get a dichotomy. There is a character here. There's Tarzan, who's worried about his missing son. And there's another character in the story called Bwana. And he's really big, and he's got a shock of black hair and broad shoulders, and, gee, I don't know, sounds a lot like Tarzan. A small child would see through that doubling gimmick long before what Edgar Rice Burroughs very proudly displays as the big reveal that Bwana is Tarzan. A small child. It's not a spoiler to say that, because a small child would see through it. It's ridiculous. And it's not the only ridiculous thing in here. For instance, Edgar Rice Burroughs never tired in the course of his Tarzan novels, or really anywhere else. This is a bugaboo that he had, that he passed on to Robert E. Howard. He never tires of mocking and sneering at men who have smooth hands, at men who are civilized and don't have the savage in them at all. He's okay with old men who have become scribes, but young men who are not he-men, he tends to evince scorn for them. In his case, very much so. I would argue also in Robert E. Howard's case, there's a lot of psychological projection going on there. Quite a bit of stuff that our friend Freud might have some fun with. And one of those, there's a character in here who is obviously going to emerge in the course of the book as a rival for the love interest in the book, a young woman named Miriam. And he is never referred to except as the Honorable So-and-so. Never. Even in the middle of an action scene when bullets are flying, he's never referred to in any way but that. And that is just Edgar Rice Burroughs mocking him. We don't know that he's worthy of that mockery. In fact, in one of the book's climaxes, the book has many climaxes, because this is, after all, Edgar Rice Burroughs that you're dealing with. Which means you're not going to be let down when it comes to that sort of thing. Absolutely not. There are multiple action set-piece climaxes here, and in one of them, the Honorable So-and-so proves that he has some grit in him. But, like I mentioned, there's a young woman named Miriam. And she, again, it's a circuitous plot. It goes on and on. It tangles needlessly a million different times. because Edgar Rice Burroughs wrote this for serialization, on deadline, for a certain amount of money per word. If you are writing a book under those circumstances, you are going to throw in plot twists, and you're not going to remember half of what you do, and there are going to be inconsistencies from one chapter to the next, which might also bear on a discussion of garbage just in general. But Miriam has an odd trait to her, which is that Korak and Akut take her in and familiarize her with the ways of the jungle. She learns the language of the great apes and the lesser apes. She learns to be accepted by the Mangani. She hunts and kills raw meat with Korak, with the other Mangani. There's a wonderful scene in here where she has been more or less captured by a couple of the bad guys in the story, or people who will do as bad guys. And she's sitting on a horse, and, they've got guns, and they've got porters all around them, and they're winding their way through an overgrown jungle path, and they think, well, she's our captive. There's no greater need for any more precaution than this. And at one point, she just reaches up to a low-hanging branch, hoists herself up into the canopy, and simply disappears. They had no idea that she could do that. And there's a scene where the Honorable so-and-so finds her talking with baboons, which he calls filthy apes. And she says, they're not filthy, they're my friends. And she reveals to him that she was raised to do this. She was raised to learn how to do this. And those scenes, actually the Miriam subplot here, is pretty well done. Now, I'm smiling because when I discuss this, I'm thinking about all the times that I've read and loved this book. It's my favorite Tarzan novel. You would think that the Tarzan novel where he encounters a city of ancient Rome that never fell would be my favorite, but no. No, it's this one. This is my favorite. And as is incumbent on all of us with GarbAugust's, I acknowledge a certain amount of inability to be objective about this book. But the important thing, one of the important things to get from GarbAugust's, the larger important things, which of course are not the most important things, the most important things to get from GarbAugust's are down in the muck enjoyment. This larger theorizing is something I like to do. You don't have to join me at all. But one of those larger things to take from GarbAugust's is that you can love, like I mentioned, you can love this while acknowledging its flaws. This is trash. Oh, that stings to say, but this is trash. This is a trash novel. It doesn't matter that the Miriam subplot is done fairly well. The reason why this is trash is because it's morosely overwritten. All of the characters are one-dimensional. And as I mentioned earlier, all of the possibilities to tell a more resonant story, something that's folded on itself, something that has nuance or subtlety, something, in other words, that would bear rereading because of, for the kind of rereading when you reread a book and it gives you more insight. There are books like that, right? If you read, it doesn't matter how many times you read Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann, you're going to get more insight out of it. It has been folded like finely tempered steel, and you can work your way through it. But you won't get that in a book where the author had to write 600 words by lunchtime. It's not possible. No one can do that. No one can write that way. And so the only saving grace would be rewriting. And by the time it came time for Edgar Rice Burroughs to rewrite this book for the book sale, he was already writing Tarzan the Indomitable at the same breakneck pace. He had no chance to fold and refold and rework and maybe find possibilities in the plot. There are all kinds of possibilities here, mainly involving young Jack. Was he always an outcast? Is he still? Was finding and being adopted by the Mangani really the magic bullet that is portrayed in this book? It's easy to see that it might not be. There's a way to tell a novel like this that is far more entertaining, far more rewarding, far more intelligent than this. Now you might say, well, okay, surely the novel that you're talking about here is Tarzan of the Apes. And I would certainly take that argument as far as it can go. In terms of writing on the page, Tarzan of the Apes is the best Tarzan book that Edgar Rice Burroughs wrote. Even down to a genuinely moving and intelligent final scene. that the final quote, the final line of dialogue that Tarzan has, that Lord Greystoke has in Tarzan of the Apes, is touching. It's and well done. It doesn't really counteract all the stuff that happens in the third act of Tarzan of the Apes. Oh my God! But after that, it became a race to meet deadlines and make money in order to establish Tarzana, California, in order to become a multimillionaire. And so it's just not present in these books. And a book that raises dramatic possibilities and either doesn't capitalize on them or the author isn't able to capitalize on them, I would argue, based on Tarzan of the Apes, which is not only the best written Tarzan novel, but the best written thing that Edgar Rice Burroughs ever wrote, based on the evidence of that book, in which he wasn't necessarily all that hurried, I would argue that he probably doesn't have the ability to do anything better, much better, than Tarzan of the Apes. I would argue that that's the case. That sounds pitiful or pitiless, but I believe it's true, and I think you could make that argument for a whole bunch of people. Right? I don't want to open a whole bunch of wounds here on GarbAugust's, but think of, for instance, Arthur Conan Doyle. There's a huge amount of concision and incredibly intelligent scene setting in the Sherlock Holmes stories. There's not a whole lot in the way of great writing. There's mostly not. It's mostly not great writing. And the times that call for it, the movement of the enigmatic fog bank at the conclusion of The Hound of the Baskervilles, for instance, very noticeably fail to fulfill their potential. And you think, well, it was a Strand magazine. It was the demand of the public. What could you expect? But then you go to The White Company, which Doyle himself thought was him at the peak of his literary qualities. Well, I love The White Company, but go and read it. It is a good demonstration of what I'm talking about, that these authors, while they're complaining about the stresses of a deadline, they may have shown us the limits of their literary ability. They may very well have done that. To get even worse, even closer to the heart of GarbAugust's, I will back off after this example. You could easily say the same thing about Bram Stoker. Okay, you could easily do that. People have been pointing out for 100 years the dramatic flaws in Dracula. Bram Stoker himself said that one particular other novel that he wrote was him being serious, him writing serious stuff, and just look at it. But anyway, Burroughs never really made that claim. He lived before Twitter. He lived really before the book tour. By the time he was writing books number 4 in the series or whatnot, Tarzan was already a hit. And eager fans just wanted a new Tarzan novel. He didn't have to do any kind of press saying, I really think what I'm trying to do in this one is explore the dimensions of such and such. In other words, he wasn't Stephen King. He didn't need to go on his high horse and try to justify each of the pot boilers that he was crapping out. So I'm not attributing this to him. But nevertheless, let's take a look at a passage in Son of Tarzan and see if you can see what I mean. This was not easy for me. I loved reading the book all over again, but it wasn't easy for me. There's a shootout scene involving the Right Honorable that never fails to excite me. But let's read a bit here together. 2 tall, bearded white men moved cautiously through the jungle from their camp beside the wide river. They were Carl Jensen and Sven Malbin, but little altered in appearance since the day years before that they and their safari had been so badly frightened by Korak and Akut as the former sought haven with them. Every year they had come to the jungle to trade with the natives or to rob them, to hunt and trap, and to guide other white men in the land they knew so well. Always since their experience with the Sheikh, who's another ongoing villain in these early books, had they operated at a safe distance from his territory. Now they were closer to his village than they had been for years, yet safe enough from discovery owing to the uninhabited nature of the intervening jungle and the fear of enmity of Kuvudu's people for the Sheikh, who in times past had raided and all but exterminated the tribe. This year they had come to trap live specimens for a European zoological garden, and today they were approaching a trap which they had set in the hopes of capturing a specimen of a large baboons that frequented the neighborhood. As they approached the trap, they became aware from the noises emanating from its vicinity that their efforts had been crowned with success. The barking and screaming of hundreds of baboons could mean naught else than that one or more of their number had fallen victim to the allurements of the bait. The extreme caution of the 2 men was prompted by former experiences with the intelligent and dog-like creatures with which they had to deal. More than one trapper has lost his life in battle with enraged baboons who will hesitate to attack nothing upon one occasion, while upon another a single gunshot will disperse hundreds of them. Heretofore, the Swedes had always watched nearby their trap, for as a rule only the stronger bulls are thus caught, since in their greediness they prevent the weaker from approaching the coveted bait, and when once within ordinary rude trap woven on the spot of interlaced branches, they are able, with the aid of their friends upon the outside, to demolish their prison and escape. But in this instance the trappers had utilized a special steel cage which could withstand all the strength and cunning of a baboon. It was only necessary, therefore, to drive away the herd which they knew were surrounding the prison and wait for their boys who were even now following them to the trap. That boys refers not to their offspring, but to native bearers, to native helpers. A little bit of a holdover there for Edgar Rice Burroughs. As they came within sight of the spot, they found conditions precisely as they had expected. A large male was battering frantically against the steel wires of the cage that held him captive. Upon the outside, several hundred other baboons were tearing and tugging in his aid, and all were roaring and jabbering and barking at the top of their lungs. But what neither the Swedes nor the baboons saw was the half-naked figure of a youth hidden in the foliage of a nearby tree. He had come upon the scene at almost the same instant as Jensen and Malbin, and was watching the activities of the baboons with every mark of interest. Korak's relations to the baboons had never been overly friendly. A species of armed toleration had marked their occasional meetings. The baboons and Akut had walked stiff-legged and growling past one another, while Korak had maintained a bared-fanged neutrality. So now he was not greatly disturbed by the predicament of their king. Curiosity prompted him to tarry a moment, and in that moment his quick eyes caught the unfamiliar coloration of the clothing of the two Swedes behind a bush not far from his. Now he was all alertness. Who were these interlopers? What was their business in the jungle of the Mangani? Korak slunk noiselessly around them to a point where he might get their scent as well as a better view of them, and scarce had he done so than he recognized them. They were the men who had fired upon him years before. His eyes blazed. He could feel the hairs upon his scalp stiffen at the roots. He watched them with the intentness of a panther about to spring upon its prey. I think if we are being coldly dispassionate, we can agree that although that is exciting prose, it is very bad prose. It's very bad. It's padded. It's stilted. It denotes the obvious. It connotes the stuff that doesn't need connoting. It pauses, again, as we saw in an earlier example, it pauses for disquisition of fact in the middle of a scene. It's bad. It's what you would do if you were knocking together this prose very quickly on a deadline. You wouldn't do any better than that. Once you hit that register and you know that fans will like that register, you'll just do that. But that's not good. That prose is not good. And it fills this book. There's virtually nothing in here that isn't written like that. All the way to the end. When we find out who on earth Bwana could be. So, my GarbAugust's pile for today was tough. I mean, I wasn't under many illusions that this was a great book, but I do feel the pull of that temptation. The temptation to say, if I have loved this thing all this time, in so many weathers, mild and bad, maybe I've loved it for a reason. Maybe that's because it's good. No. You build emotional resonance into some things, and trash can take that kind of building just as well as treasure can. So I went to one of my favorites for GarbAugust's, and that's not the only time that I will do this. I'm going to go back, but for next time, I'm going to read something brand new. I'm not going to go back to an old favorite again for my next GarbAugust's video. Good Lord. Look at how easy it is for me to get to half an hour if I'm talking about Edgar Rice Burroughs. Good Lord. I could go on and on and on about this book, about what Pavlovich reveals about how the Russians were seen in the teens when Burroughs was writing this, before the Second World War, before the Soviet Union flourished and became a world power. I could go on and on about what ground Miriam, the character, breaks in this book. A character who ultimately needs rescuing, but needs a lot less of it than the most female love interests do in pulp yarns. Most of the time, the love interest, the heroines in peril, in Burroughs' Barsoom tales, for instance, they have strong spirit, they have sharp tongues, they are proud, they certainly never break in will or grovel to their captors or their enemies, but That scene in this book where Miriam simply reaches up to a low-hanging branch and swings herself into the trees, one-handed, a thing that the men, the bigger, larger men with guns who are guarding her could not do. That scene, the scene where she's talking with the baboons, that is new. There's not much like that in pulp fiction before this novel, I don't think, but it doesn't matter. I mean, it does matter. That is interesting, but it doesn't elevate this book. But anyway, that is trash for today. One of my favorite trash novels, Son of Tarzan, which has become emblematic of trash, right? I mean, now when people want to sort of quickly signpost that something is trash, they will refer to the son of whatever, and they don't even know that they're referring to the son of Tarzan. They just know that has become synonymous with garbage. That a book or a movie will be called the son of something or other. Stan Lee pokes fun at it in his second book, Son of Origins of Marvel Comics. That has become such a staple of garbage that it would be a surprise if the book that gave us that wasn't trash. And unfortunately, it is. It's trash from start to finish. Really enjoyable though. Hoo-hoo! I strongly recommend it as trash. It is. Like everything else that Edgar Rice Burroughs wrote, it is a real page-turner. You just have to worry with Burroughs. He knows how to tell a story. He knows how to turn up the temperature slowly and steadily on a plot. By the end of the book, I've read this, I don't know how many times. I know everything that happens in it. There's no detail that I've missed. And I'm still, hold my calls for the last 50 pages. But he does have longueurs. Obviously, as we saw in those two excerpts that I read, he has a weakness for just stopping in the middle of scenes in order to digress about wonky stuff that you don't need to know. The reader doesn't need to know it ever, much less at the moment that he does it. Just have to be wary of that when you're going into this author, in case this is your first time. But anyway, that is GarbAugust for today. I will be back. Thank you, BookTube.